I was in my early 20s when I picked up a motivational book for the very first time. And I was told this one book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, would change my life in the same way that it had changed and refocused millions before me. But at that point in my life, and in my opinion, on the very first reading, this book had little or no impact on me all my life. Because prior to that time, my sole inspiration came from those peers I revered and I idolized. And especially one seller, because he would leave the office with 4 or 5 black and white television sets very early in the afternoon and then return the very next day with a fistful of orders, deposits, and cash. And the next day, he would top up again, sell a few more televisions, and again return with more orders, deposits, and cash. And I watched this happen day after day. And how did I see that? Because he actually rented the bungalow at the back of my parents' house. And I'm in my early teens and I'm watching this. And to me at least, what he was achieving was a lot more relevant than any of the words that I'd read that were penned by Napoleon Hill. And I'm talking about reading a book like that 10 years later. But it wasn't until a few years later when I'd read the book 5 Great Rules of Selling by Percy H. Whiting. And that book was first published in 1947. Once I'd read that book, I began to realize that both my perception and fundamental foundation of selling and professional selling techniques had been modeled by those I looked up to the most. And more than half of what I'd learned did not align with what this book and other subsequent books by the super sellers of the time had suggested was the necessary course of action in specific situations. And what's more, the more I studied the techniques in these books, the more my own sales figures increased and increased and increased. Now, because that book by Percy H. Whiting, 5 Great Rules of Selling, had such an impact on my life and on the way that I sold, I gravitated towards other classic books at around that time. And they were How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling, How I Multiplied My Income and Happiness in Selling, and How I Learned the Secrets of Success in Selling. They all sound similar, don't they? Well, there was just the one author for all of them, and that author was Frank Bettinger. Now, he was instrumental with the information that I read and road tested to actually see an absolute explosion in my selling career. And as I kept learning, I then gravitated to other motivational masterpieces of that time. Books like How to Win Friends and Influence People and How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Both books were by Dale Carnegie, but what they did, unlike Frank Bettinger that gave me a foundation in selling that I could grow from, these Dale Carnegie books allowed me greater understanding of how to communicate with people and do it successfully. Now, because of what I'd learned between just these two authors, they had an incredible, more than profound influence upon my life, and especially upon the selling, the way I knew that at the time. Now, because of what I read in those days, it didn't take long for me to realize that many of those I looked up to, many of those that actually started telling me what I should do in selling, even my coaches and mentors of that time, really didn't pass on everything that they knew. They held back, and perhaps sometimes I got as much as 80 or 90%. But that one important ingredient was always missing. And I later likened that to just having a mother that purposely leaves out one or two final but critical ingredients in a recipe that she'll pass on to a daughter-in-law. Now, she'll do that to maintain her superiority as a cook in her son's eyes. And in so many cases, I found the same thing with those that were above average sellers that were feeding me information, as well as the mentors and coaches of the time, because they held back that little one ingredient to make them sell better than others. And the one thing that I've learnt is I don't do that with the people I mentor. I have no reason any longer to keep elevating my position. It's already there, the records are there, everything that I've achieved in my life is there. I don't need to write any more books, but I will, and I don't need to put any more training courses together, but I will, because I need to pass on that information that has been passed on to me and I've used successfully for the next generation and the generation after that to come. Then years later, other classics like The Power of Positive Thinking by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale became a constant companion to me. Now, I would highly recommend this book to my friends, my staff, and my peers, but also I'd give them a word of caution. That caution was that they overlook or even take out the religious overtones in the book. But today, I realise that without that religious content, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale's bestsellers could not have been written, because each book was simply a book dealing with the power of self-motivation based upon his faith in God and the reliance on the truth contained within the pages of the Holy Bible. And at that point, I have to admit I was both pleased that I had read these works and at the same time a little frustrated and bewildered. For some strange reason, I got the impression that I had to believe in myself or I would fail. And I also observed that some of the very successful people I'd met did not seem to possess many of the successful traits, the love for humanity and other essential factors for success. And that those success factors in one field of endeavour did not seem to be necessary to be translated in the same way to another field. And that made me confused as to what was going on, because I could understand one point of view, but another was then becoming rather difficult to comprehend. Now, as confusing as things were becoming, experience also taught me that a positive mental attitude alone was not the universal criterion for success. No, success was related to a number of factors all working together in harmony with each other. The pressures of life and the performance levels we're required to adhere to rely more on a different kind of attitude than a positive mental attitude. They rely on the right mental attitude to be in place than any other factor. Now, that's a point that was brought out by Earl Nightingale in his film narration of The Stranger's Secret, a film I can honestly say changed my life and helped me rise above the threshold of above average results to levels I could not have even dreamed of previously. And it was about this time that I started appreciating that my faith in what I was able to do was one of the most foundational criterion I could ever hang on to, because without faith, you have nowhere to go. And that is brought out so heavily in the book Think and Grow Rich. And because of that one factor, my renewed understanding of the factor on faith and how important it was in everything that you do, I then started thinking about Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, because I remembered it had a number of chapters based on faith, his understanding of faith, and his explanation of faith. And because of that, I reread Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. But after that mind-changing experience I embraced after watching Earl Nightingale's movie, The Stranger's Secret, Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, came alive to me in a way that I would never have expected it to. Now, I'm a fast reader, and a book like Think and Grow Rich I'll usually read in an evening. But this time, it took me 3 days to read it from cover to cover, then reread it and reread it until my mind began to absorb the wisdom that I was experiencing in that book. Now, the first reading only took a few hours, but then I read it with pen and paper in hand, underlining the points that would jump up off the pages and into my mind. I then grabbed a notepad and quickly filled it with content, then a second notepad, and even a third notepad, analysing everything I could. And I simply could not get what I was learning out of my mind. And it would be fair to say I was a changed man forever because of what I'd read. Now, at that time, I was working as the state manager for the Yellow Pages telephone directory, and there, my staff were the first to notice a change in me and how it affected my focus and also my selling. Now, even while working as a state manager, my personal sales had not only gone through the roof, but that momentum dragged the whole of my sales force behind me, with me. And as my figures increased, so did the state's profit margins, and the sales increase at never before heard of levels of 40% increase in revenue over last year's results. That was the first time any major Yellow Pages telephone directory had increased at that level in a capital city ever. But it was then followed by a further 40% increase on the previous year, and then followed by a further 40% increase on the next year as well. Unheard of? Yes, totally unheard of in the industry, but the figures cannot be changed today because they're a part of history now. Since that time, I've had the privilege of meeting and working with some of Australia's elite salespeople, those in the top 1% of the money earners here. And over that time, so many of the average and even above average salespeople I've come into contact with in this country have suggested that their professional secrets are hard to get hold of. And it's true. The super sellers guard their secrets in a way that most other industries won't. And yet, personally, I've never found this to be the case. Every professional super seller I've ever met and worked with has been more than willing to help, advise, and answer the questions that I put to them. I also understand because of the many approaches that they get from the average people, the average sellers. And in so many cases, those average sellers will disagree with their methods. They become very selective as to who they're prepared to divulge their secrets to. And I can understand that. And in fact, on one occasion I was told, why should I help them when all they want to do is to gather information and in most cases, never even try it out? How will they ever know it works for them if they never try it out? And another super seller stated that at best some people will show off their new information to their peers, but they'll never get around to using it themselves. And these statements are sad but true. and I only pray that the contents of this video series are not dealt with in the same manner. And as I close this introductory message in the first module of this online sales training program, in just a few months from now, I will include the 8-point plan that I derived from the book Think and Grow Rich over that 3-day period that I was locked away with the book, 3 large notepads, a few pens and loads of determination. It's something I've never revealed before in either any of my keynote talks, my sales training programs, my books, my private tutoring, my mentoring or my coaching. But at this stage in my life, after too many health scares and an aging body, I believe it's a good time to share some of the things that have helped me rewrite so many sales record books decade after decade, both nationally and internationally. Wait a little while and it'll all be revealed, and when it is revealed, I will guarantee that your selling life will change, and change in a way you could only dream of.